Joining me now is Bill Federer. Bill, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you, Brandon.
Let's talk a little bit about propaganda. Maybe get into a little bit about the real meaning of Christmas, but let's talk about propaganda. You're working on a new book on propaganda. I have my Brainwashing Part 3 coming out in the new year, and then I'll release my book on brainwashing. So you and I have a lot we could talk about. But tell me about your new book on propaganda and how you think it relates, particularly with all the, I don't know, should we use the word civil war going on now within MAGA and within the America First movement and within the podcast world? Candace Owens and so many others, Tucker Carlson. How does all this fit with the topic of propaganda? Any idea?
Yeah, well, several threads come together. The first is marketing of products in the 1800s was Sears catalog and Singer sewing machine, and they would list every detail and you'd make an informed purchase. But in the early 1900s, a guy named Edward Bernays invented magazine ads where you would say nothing about a product. You would just make it look like everybody's using it and keeping up with the Joneses. And so he said, women go into a department store and think they're buying shoes. They're not. The shoes were picked out for them by the marketing executive who paid the actors to put them on, paid the photographer to take the pictures, paid the magazines to publish it. And the women see it in the magazines and figure, well, everybody must be using it as famous actresses, and then they buy the shoes. Crisco is another example. Nobody knew what was in Crisco. It's cottonseed oil. In the deep south, they'd harvest cotton. They have left over these seeds that they'd mush into industrial seed oil that they'd use in machinery. Nobody ate it, but somebody had the idea of bleaching it, put in these containers. And so you go from knowing everything about a Singer sewing machine to nothing about a product, but you're ingesting it because you think everybody else is using it. And so Edward Bernays pushed smoking cigarettes, pushed women smoking cigarettes, pushed all these different things because he's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And Freud's a psychoanalyst that discovered we are social creatures. We want to be accepted. We do not want to be rejected. Simple. But the whole thing is based around that. And so it was to create the impression that you think everybody else is using something and you'll want to buy it. So the whole fashion industry is based on this. You see other people wear it, you see it advertised, and then pretty soon you want to wear it. And then people see you wear it and they want to wear it. And and so Joseph Goebbels in Germany reads Edward Bernays' book, and Edward Bernays changed the name. He wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. And we're a government from the consent of the governed. But what if you could engineer consent of the governed? And so he wrote a book called The Engineering of Consent. So if you can sway people to buy a product, you can sway people to buy an ideology, to buy a political platform. And so Joseph Goebbels, Germany, said, hey, people will believe something if they think other people believe it. So he would get 100,000 people together in a stadium, and they would give the Hitler salute in the front. It would work its way back through the crowd and like a wave at a football game. And as it got closer to you, you'd feel pressured to give it. And people would see you giving it, and they'd feel pressured to give it. And everybody'd leave the stadium thinking, well, I guess everybody's in on it because they were all giving the Hitler salute. So it manipulated their impression of what everybody else was believing. And then they would feel pressured to take the same beliefs. Then you see it injected into schools. And so they call it social emotional learning or behavior modification, where the teacher would celebrate somebody if they come out as trans or some alternative agenda, and then they shame in front of the group, the class, somebody that holds old traditional values. And so they embarrass them. And so all the other kids see that. And none of them want to be embarrassed, and so they'll all want to gravitate toward being accepted by the teacher, and so they'll adopt these alternative sexual agendas, and it's very effective. So the idea of marketing of products. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the Cold War. And now I'll pause here if you want to inject anything.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So it's basically group consensus. What do we call it? FOMO, the fear of missing out today, is that what they call it? So people are afraid they're missing out, right? They want to be the cool. They want to be part of the junior high cool pizza eating table. And that, I don't want to sound elitist or anything, but the older I get, the more I realize just how immature the average American adult is. And I tell the guys in the control room that all the time. I'm like, you guys, I know you're in your early 20s and you look at these people in their 40s and 50s and 60s and think, oh, they're adults. They're so smart. They're so mature. I said, wait till you get to be my age. You'll realize that most of the people that you have living around you are just as immature as they were in junior high. And they're 2 and 3 and 4 marriages and multiple bankruptcies and all kinds of troubles in their life proves they're still the immature kids. They're just older. And I think this is why this kind of marketing in part works and works increasingly well in a social media driven world. We have a nation of infantile adults. You want to jump on board and agree with me or disagree?
No, you're right. It's this manipulation of your perception and wanting to fit in with a group so bad. So that's the one thing. And then we look at the color revolutions. And so after World War II, countries in Europe wanted to be free. And the Soviets didn't like that. And so they would send KGB agents into countries to do what's called critical theory, where you simply observe all the groups. Takes a while, right? Ethnic groups, Bosnians, Croats, and Serbs, religious groups, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox, economic groups, racial groups, doesn't matter. And you would classify them as victims or oppressors, haves and have-nots. And so once you identify all the groups, you would look for the influencers of that group. You would identify these influencers and realize that if you could influence that one person, you could influence all the followers. And whether this is a Hollywood actress, whether this is a music person or an athlete or a politician. And so they would have these campaigns targeting the influencers. Remember, Biden invited the TikTok influencers to the White House to push his, Ukraine war efforts. And it's like, why would you have these TikTok? Well, they're influencers. And so the Soviet tactic is you would befriend them. In the 1950s in Hollywood, they would invite the movie producers and actresses to cocktail parties and then befriend them. And then they would identify all the friends of this influencer and they would target the friends. And if they could get the friend to introduce them to the influencer, then they would have more credibility with the influencer. I mean, this is a very well thought out game plan. And then they would begin to seed the influencer with the talking points that they wanted them to spread through their group. The purpose of it is division. And so you want a radical left and a radical right. You would identify, and so you would influence them to spread these narratives. You would cause the groups in the country to fight each other. You would have them classified as the haves and the have-nots, the oppressed and the oppressors. And so once you got them to fight each other, you wanted there to be bloodshed. Why? Because then you have mass emotion. And once the public is in a state of mass emotion, it is real easy to channel that. People want to blame somebody for the killing, right? They're itching. Who do I blame? Who do I blame for this killing? And so then they would use the influencers to steer the blame any way they wanted. And they would usually steer the blame for the new leader of the country. And his popularity would fall because people would believe the influencers. And as the leader's popularity fell, then they could do a coup or a rigged election and nobody would question it because by this time they didn't like the leader and they would replace the leader with a Soviet puppet. And then the violence would stop, not realizing that it was the Soviets behind the violence in the first place. There'd be this honeymoon period of, but then when the dust settles, people would realize we just gave up our free country. And now we're satellites of the Soviet Union. We're behind the Iron Curtain. And so these tactics were used and country by country fell. And Truman does nothing because he thinks the United Nations that he helped form will bring world peace. But the next president is Eisenhower. And now we focus on Egypt. And in the 1950s, there's a King Fuad, and he is sort of playing games. He's going to side with the West. He's going to side with the Soviet Union, but he becomes unpopular in his country. And so there's a bunch of people in the military led by Gamal Nasser that wants to take him out. And the CIA helps it. It's called Project FF. And they overthrow him. And so now the CIA is doing the same thing that the KGB is doing, and we have Iran. So a little history on Iran. After World War I, they get a secular leader who wants to give women freedom and let them wear fashions and let them get educated. And he's very pro-West in Iran. He's the Shah. Well, when World War II starts, the Shah did not kick out Germans. And so Britain and the Soviet Union arrange a coup and overthrow the Shah and replace him with a guy named Mossadegh. And Mossadegh plays ball for a while, but then during the Cold War, Mossadegh begins to flirt with siding with the Soviet Union, and he nationalizes the oil industry in Iran. Why is that important? In 1908, Britain formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and you know it better as BP. And so when Mossadegh nationalizes it, it's basically taken over Britain's oil fields, and so Britain has an oil shortage. And so they appealed to Eisenhower for help, and Eisenhower approves Project Ajax. And this is where the Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, sends Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, over to Tehran, and he does the KGB thing in reverse. He divides the country into groups, and then he recruits mobsters and gangsters and escalates it into violence, and they attack mosques, and then they co-opt the media, the influencers, with bribes or threats to begin to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. And when the people believe it enough, they did a coup and they put Mossadegh under house arrest, locked him away for the rest of his life, and replaced him with the Shah's son. And then the CIA would do the same thing in different countries, and the KGB would do it in other countries. And so this is called the Cold War. These proxy wars in other countries, and the idea is that you would go in there and divide the country into groups, pit them against each other, and have this violence that could be blamed on the leader. And then when the people believed the lies, then the influencers, then they could replace the leader. Obama turned all that inward on America. So when Allen Dulles, the CIA, when this became public, mostly after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and so Congress passed the Smith-Mundt Act, which forbade the government from creating media to be used on the American public. This propaganda, this wanting to sway the public in America to support these different agendas. And so everybody knew the CIA still did it just covertly, but then Obama brought it back, called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which gave his government the authority to create media to brainwash the American public, to sway them. And now we have the beginnings of Facebook. And then Obama used this for his Arab Spring. And all the social media followers and all the countries, and they would sway them to overthrow their pro-West leaders and replace them with Muslim Brotherhood people. And then Obama signed an executive order, 2015, using behavioral science insights for the benefit of the American people. And then you read it, and it's like trying to figure out the psychological decision-making process of the public and to sway it for the sake of national security, right? They're doing PsyOps, psychological operations on the American public. And then Obama signed the 2016 Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which gave him the authority to decide what's disinformation, what's not, and to label all his political opponents as enemies. Catholics that are pro-life, moms that speak out at school board meetings, right? They're the enemy. And the same way that Obama used the IRS and had Lois Lerner take this federal agency and turn it against conservatives, these different government agencies were now targeting conservatives. And so what was used, there's a book Michael Waller wrote called Big Intel, How Cold War Heroes Became Dupes of the Deep State. So during the Cold War, we had people using these tactics, but it was to keep a country from falling into the Soviet circle, right, to keep them free. So even though they were subversive, they were still had a good end. But Obama turned this inward on America. And then with the ability of governments to track people, and with AI, and now they do continual polling, continuously. They're releasing a story, and then they immediately know who's forwarding it to who and who's forwarding it to who. And then if somebody has a counter narrative, they try to figure out who's initiating this counter narrative and canceling them. And since it's all done online, it's really easy to do. And
so let me ask you, how do you see all this playing into the Civil War in MAGA, America First, Candace Owens? How does all that propaganda fit destroying a movement that had such potential to get us back on track, deal with the deep state, and return us to a constitutional republic?
Right. So midterms. The Republicans were on track to win the midterms. Charlie was motivating.
You're talking about midterms 2026.
Right. So Charlie was motivating young people in unprecedented ways. And I believe the deep state is somehow involved in his killing. And then, but we still have this huge block of conservative turning point people that are being motivated, and the Democrats are facing losing the midterms. And so they did a PsyOps. They targeted conservative influencers, people that are trusted by conservative, and they wanted to get people that could tap into the following that Charlie Kirk had. And so they looked at people and they would co-opt them the same way that they did with Hollywood producers during the 1950s, right? And so they would target these individuals and feed them stories, find out who influences the influencers, right? Their friends, and feed them stories. And then rather than do research and then say, okay, this is the conclusion of our research and release it, they do this stringing the country on. Well, now I think it's this person. No, I think it's this person. Now I think and the goal is what? The goal is to sow division. Sow division so that the energy of Charlie Kirk's following can be diffused into all kinds of other things. The anti-Semitism, anything. But the goal is to divide MAGA so that the Republicans will be demotivated and lose the midterms. And then once the Democrats can win the midterms and put in Hakeem Jeffries and start impeachment trials of Trump and start investigations, there'll be a million it'll kneecap the entire Trump agenda. And so when you study this, the influencers usually don't even know they've been co-opted. Their only thing is if they would sit back and say, we're going to do a year's worth of research and come up with our conclusion, and then we'll release it to the public. But to come up with every new thought and then get in front of a microphone and say it out, that is sowing division. And so division, the word devil means to divide. And so the devil's in heaven. He's sowing division in heaven, right? And it gets a third of the angels to follow him, and he's cast out. So then he's in the garden, and he sows division. And he gets Adam to blame Eve and Cain to kill Abel. And then he sows division with Abimelech, right? So Gideon defeats 100,000 Midianites, and his sons are ruling Israel. Well, he has an illegitimate son named Abimelech, and he goes to Shechem. And he says, is it better for you, the sons of Gideon, remember also that I'm your flesh and your bone? And so he sows division, and he kills all the sons of Gideon. But this idea of sowing division, the British did it. 1714, they started a trading post in India, turned into a trading fort, turned into them giving guns to their allies and guns to people that weren't their allies because they didn't want them buying guns from the Dutch and then having the Dutch get into India. So here the British are giving guns to both sides. And then they sort of sit back when the two sides fight each other and they weaken each other. And then the British can conquer both of the weakened kingdoms real easy. And they did this again and again until they took over all of India. And so now we go to the American Revolution. And the Americans and the Indians had sort of reached an equilibrium after the French and Indian War. But the British come in, General Johnny Burgoyne, and he meets with the Mohawk Indians in New York, and he incites them to attack the Americans. So they're doing the same thing. They're coming in, they're sowing this division. It's mentioned in our Declaration as one of the 27 reasons that we were rebelling. It says, the king has excited domestic insurrection amongst us, right? By having the merciless savages of the frontier butcher, our settlements. And so you see this tactic. It happened again in the War of 1812. The British in Pensacola, Florida, went up to the Red Stick Creek Indians. And you know the pronunciation of Red Stick in French. It's Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge. Right? And so the British go to the Indians and promise them money for scalps. And so the Indians attack Fort Mims, Alabama. It's an American fort. And they capture it, and they proceed to scalp 550 people because they want the scalps to bring to the British so they can get paid. And so these tactics went from that, to Machiavelli. Machiavelli lived in Italy 500 years ago, but his teaching spread. And so the Machiavelli idea is Italy was a bunch of city-states that always fought. And if one prince could control all of the city-states, it would bring peace. And so the ends was good. So the ends justifies the means. So if a prince wants to conquer Italy to stop the infighting, and he goes into a town and wants to conquer it, the people would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals to sow division, to smash windows, to set things on fire, the people will cry out for help, and the prince will come in and get rid of the very criminals he bribed to create all the crises. And everyone will praise the prince as a hero. And so it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house, set it on fire, then you go around the front of the house, sell them a fire extinguisher, and they'll pay anything for it. But the idea is that you want to create a crisis. You want to create a division. And so how do you destroy a marriage? Sow division. How do you destroy a church? Sow division. How do you destroy a country? Sow division. And so when you have influencers sowing division, now you look at it, you can channel, once their people are emotional, you can channel that emotion very easily. They've studied mob psychology. And so think of it for a moment. October 7th happens, and we have 1,400 Jews killed, and the whole world is filled full of emotion. Give them a month. They channel all that emotion back at Israel. So Israel is blamed for the attack on Israel. And so you look at Charlie Kirk getting killed. Give them a month. They've channeled all that in energy back to blaming Turning Point for Charlie's killing. It's like, who would have thought this? They're brilliant at it. And so this idea, the PsyOps, these psychological operations. I talked to a former military PsyOps person, and I said, well, now explain to me some of the examples. And he goes, okay, we were over in Afghanistan, and there was this imam that was causing us problems. And if we would have killed him, the Muslims would have risen up and attacked us. So we had a parade starting in the middle of town with loudspeakers praising this imam for helping the Americans under the table. And we're going through the streets with loudspeakers saying this, and they lay a basket of fruit on the imam's front door. And he says, by the time we got back to the base, that problem was taken care of. I said, what do you mean? He goes, his own people killed him. They believed the PsyOps. So this enemy of the United States, right? They swayed the people to blame him. And so it's the PsyOps was used during World War II. That we dropped pamphlets on, German occupied cities that would, in their own language, that would say your side is already lost. Your boss just hasn't told you yet. And they would read it and say, why are we out here fighting? I read we were already lost. It would mess with their minds. And then the Japanese did it to us with Tokyo Rose. She was a woman with a seductive voice on the radio, and the radio waves would go across to our ships, and she would say, you Americans are terrible, and you're doing this terrible, that terrible, and it would demoralize our guys. And in the Bible, you can begin to see this over and over. 12 spies go into the promised land. 10 come back with a negative report. There are giants in the land. We're grasshoppers. The land devours the inhabitants thereof. Let's stone Moses and go back to Egypt. And so the 10 spies spread a negative report. They sowed division. It was demoralizing, disheartening. And, Joshua and Caleb stood up. But this idea that they lost before they ever got to the battlefield. They were defeated in their mind. And so that's the tactic is if you're wanting to take over a country and you have a really strong group of people that are motivated to get involved and save the country. What was Charlie's message? Go back to church, get married, have kids, and save the country. And Charlie thought politics. I mean, I had a chance to visit with Brooke Collins, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. And she said that Charlie Kirk was in her office so much and that he would suggest this person for this position and that person for that position. And she said a lot of people are in their positions because Charlie, here's a guy that was, maybe 30. He was amazing. But he thought politics.
So you believe, Charlie, so you believe, Bill, that all this division and accusations and crazy talk on social media, it's being deliberately done to divide this movement. The question is, who is doing it? Are they doing it on their own? Is it Iran?
No, it's the deep state.
The deep state?
Trump has been trying to fire him.
Russia or China involved at all?
I would think so because they're globalist.
But you think some of these people are paid? You think some of these folks are being paid to do this?
I think it's so Obama put into federal positions lots of people that have a Democrat ideology, and they're forever anti-Trumpers, and so when a new president comes in, he can only fire 10% of them. It's the law. So unionizing. We just recently had a vote in Congress, and 13 Republicans joined the Democrats regarding unionized federal employees. And it doesn't sound like that much, but there's what's called the SES, Senior Executive Service, and it's a union of all the top people in every federal agency. Department of Homeland Security, Department of all the top people and all those belong to this union. And a new president, by law, can only fire 10% of them. And so Obama and Biden shoved into this union lots of leftist ideological people. And Trump's trying to get his agenda, but it's like pushing. One time I visited with John Ashcroft, and he said it was like pushing a rope. He says he could appoint his right-hand man and maybe a couple people that are assistants to him. But then when you get to the second tier and the third tier, they would just let it sit on their desk. And when they would finally say, get it done, they would just put it on the other guy's desk. And then when they would finally say, get it done, they would put it on and they have a term for it. It's called slow walking. And and so their goal is to drag it out for 4 years so it never gets implemented.
Okay, there we are. Drag it out for 4 years, and that's where we're at. That's where we're at. But I want to ask you in closing, do you believe some of these people are being paid to do this division, distraction, to divide the camp? Are they being paid?
Well, I would think that some of the social media people, they're financially benefiting from the attack because they're getting views. And for their point of view, from someone that does a lot, they think if they can get views and clicks, it's got to be good. And so they don't. It's controversy media. They want to talk about controversial things because it gets views. Not asking the question, is this going to help or hurt the midterms?
And what does it say about our society and the conservative movement that that's what they're interested in? I said to my wife last night, I said, the fact that people watch these programs and they have so many viewers tells you just how, again, we're living in a culture where the adults, most of the adults in America are juveniles. I'm telling you, the number of adults that we personally know of in our own area, they live for the next vacation. They live for the next trip. They're deeply in debt, spending money they don't have. Many of them have a drinking problem. And I'm like, this is no different than junior high. So what does this say about the conservative MAGA movement or America First movement? Are people, the percentage in this movement that watch these people? I mean, I don't think they have the spiritual and intellectual wherewithal to bring real solutions to the country because I don't think they're mature enough. They can handle an inch deep and a mile wide, but they're not mature enough to handle the information we bring. And that's why we never, ever built this network on population, on numbers. We always built it on deep content, biblical worldview, theology, doctrine, national security, history. Because if they're not thinkers and they're not readers, they're not leaders. And in addition to that, if you think you're going to sustain a network built on a bunch of juvenile adults that are looking for controversial TV, rage programming, rage podcasts, your organization will go belly up. We don't need the biggest audience. We just need an audience of highly educated and mature and spiritually mature adults. And our organization just does great with that because we've never marketed to the masses. We were specifically trying to train biblical worldview people and leaders. But what do you think? I go back to the question. What do you think it says about the movement of MAGA? I'm not sure the movement of MAGA is made up of enough intellectually competent, mature, self-controlled people to actually go beyond rallies and slogans. And you and I both know rallies and slogans will not fix our country's problems.
Yeah, so controversy sells. You remember Phil Donahue? I mean, he would put they'd wanted these couples to fight on TV, right? Because it sells.
Jerry Springer.
Jerry Springer, there you go. And England had the royal family, and it was like people want to get into the controversies of the royal family, right? And so it is. But the question is always to be asked: will it help or hurt the midterms? Is it going to mobilize people to get out and campaign to win the midterms, or is it going to take that energy that Charlie Kirk had built and diffuse it into infighting and actually blaming the very people that were hurt for participating in the killing? It's like Israel is blaming Israel for Israel being attacked. In Islam, when they rape a woman, it's the woman's fault for allowing herself to be used as a tool of Satan to tempt the man. I mean, who would have think that you could blame the woman who's been the victim of rape and then she gets whipped 100 times? So this whole concept, it's in the Bible. It's called projection. Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of lusting after her when she was lusting after him. All right. So you accuse your opponent of what you're guilty of. But these are tactics that need to be explained so that people can identify them.
100%.
And if the easy question is it going to, how's it going to affect the midterms?
Yeah.
The Democrats are laser focused on winning the midterms.
Yep.
And psychological operations have been used for 50 years. They call them color revolutions, and they've been used by the CIA and the KGB to overthrow governments. And so this is only different because it's being used against us. These are deep state people. I started getting into that SES, Senior Executive Service. Trump's been trying to fire people.
Yeah.
And every time he does, they say, no, you can't fire him. And so once they're not fired, what are they doing? They're working behind his back. They're
by the way, the
leaking
color
stuff.
revolution was because the CIA would put people into groups and mark them with a color. You're this color, that color. And then they would pit those colors against each other, right?
Yeah. James Lindsay is the best one to explain it. But China, they had the reds and the blacks. And so then they began to paint the one as bad. And then the other was the one that got all the favors. And people would even turn in their own kids to be killed so that they could switch from one color to the next to show their loyalty to the CCP. And so your goal is you want a radical left and a radical right and pit them against each other so that there'll be division. And then in the confusion, you want to channel that emotion to blaming somebody, and you want to blame your opponent for the division. If they can get boys to think they're girls, if they can get the whole entire world to inject something into their body that they don't know what's in it, if they can, the power of psychological, it's marketing, but the power, and they can individualize it now. So the University of Zurich did a study on Reddit users, a website where you post questions and answers. And they built a profile on every user. And they found out that bots, B-O-T-S, bots were 6 times more effective at getting people to change their opinions than humans are.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So they study you and they know you. I mean, here, there's stories where they call it sex torting. So, a teenage kid comes home from football practice. He just finished his dinner. It's a true story. And he pulls his phone out, and they had like an AI generated image of him doing something sexual. I don't know. And then they said they're going to send it to every one of his friends on his list unless he pays money, and he doesn't have money. He has $30. They said, no, you got to pay $300. And it's like 150 texts within the next 3 hours. And then the kid committed suicide. The power they have. And now with Chat GPT, this one, it was a Christian family, and the mother, the son committed suicide. Like, what? And she looks on his phone, and there's all these texts with Chat GPT. And it's saying, I'll see you on the other side. And, you're doing the right thing. And I mean, it was encouraging him to kill himself. The power that this has, but it's used on the public. And so they censor, and then you get unwitting influencers who are just interested in clicks and views. And you without doing the research and saying, okay, this is going to take a little time. And then, they just throw out, today, this is my thought. I'm going to blame so-and-so. Today, this is what, and somebody is feeding them these ideas. And so but their goal is division.
Division.
Blaming the victim for the attack. But the goal is midterms.
Wow. Our goal is
Democrats
midterms.
are laser focused on midterms. They want to diffuse all the conservative youth energy into endless rabbit trails. The goal is to diffuse the energy, but to steal the midterms.
And then, of course, people get confused, they get disappointed. It becomes so much drama that they just walk away, throw their hands up, and they quit, and they sit on the sideline. And so
it's like a divorce.
Exactly right. We got to go, but I know we need to get you back.
I like both sides, so I'm just going to not communicate with either of them. I'm just going to back away.
Wow. We got to get you back. Such a deep topic, but it's so important. Propaganda, brainwashing, and how a lot of the drama we're seeing on social media may very well be orchestrated by the deep state to stop the midterms from being successful and to derail the real America First movement. Wow. Bill Federer, AmericanMinute.com. Our clips, by the way, that we put out of our interviews always get big response. So people love this kind of stuff. But that's because we don't have a shallow adult audience of juvenile thinking adults. They're a deep thinking, mature, want to learn, want to read, want to study audience. And that's why they love our program, our network, interviews with you. And that's why those clips do well, because our people are readers and leaders, and you're catering right to them. So thank you, Bill, at AmericanMinute.com. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. And all this information is in a book on socialism if they want to buy it.
What's it called?
It's called Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. I'm writing another book, but that's the one that has some of the content that
and
I'm
it's at
jumping off of.
AmericanMinute.com, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill.